Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Jim, it is my
John.
friend Jim. Hello.
How you doing, buddy?
It's good to see you again. 2
Nice
weeks
to
later,
see you.
and here we are, back
I love
together
it.
again. Yes.
I absolutely love this. That's not hyperbole. There's no reason for me to stroke you. I love this. I love us getting together. I love this podcast. I love what you have created and allowed me to take a very small slice and be a part of.
And that's all the
It's
time we
great.
have today, folks. Thanks so much for signing
Good night,
in.
everybody. This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast.
Anyway, season 5,
Episode 14, if I'm correct.
Yes, chapter 14 of the Linking Rings.
It all ties together.
Plus a revisit with, I think we might have hyperbolized about him last time, but you can't do too much hyperbolizing about Mike Super because he is truly super, and that really is his name.
Yeah, tremendous guy. I personally learned a lot from him in terms of his commitment to whatever company he's working for. The amount of time that Mike Super is willing to spend post-show, being in the room, doing additional magic for anybody who wants to talk to him or come up and get a picture with him is phenomenal. And when I think of that in terms of how, because I don't think I'm wrong on this. We worked with him in a corporate show in Las Vegas, and the company liked him so much that they rebooked him for the same show the following year. I've never seen that done.
They rebooked him right after the show.
Yeah,
and
never.
it's,
Now, that happens to me on occasion, but I don't have an act.
right.
So, I just host things, and
Yes.
I don't have anything that you can get tired of seeing, but to bring back the same entertainer the very next year, that says a lot about Mike Super, in my opinion.
Yep. It's, that the bugaboo for magicians is being told, no, we had a magician last year, so we don't want to hire a magician. They're not hiring a magician. They're hiring Mike Super. And he is so good at it and had so many good thoughts about it that I wanted to just quickly dive back into just a couple things he said, because I was really curious, since it's his bread and butter, what does he love and what doesn't he love about corporate work? What's the best part about working corporate gigs? And what's the worst part? And pretend you don't have any clients listening right now.
Yeah, no. And this is the kind of guy I am. I would answer this even to the clients and answer it honestly. So the best part of a corporate gig is twofold. One is the paycheck is usually very, very good, because a lot of times I'm the least expensive thing that they're putting on. So with that in mind, the paycheck is always very, very good for the amount of time on stage. And the other thing that is very, very good is I love that the audience has a lot of times their expectations of what this entertainment or what this magician is going to be is so low that when I come out, I kind of know I'm going to surprise them in a good way. And that's the great thing, watching that changeover from a bunch of people in suits or tuxedos sitting there with their arms folded, their body language is very closed off, to at the end they're waving and going, "Yeah, great job! Oh, it's amazing!" Right? Or a standing O. So that's the best part for me. The corporate expectation from the audience is very low. From the client booking you, it's very high, right? So you can't help, if you have a decent act, to go over very, very well. The worst part of being in a corporate setting is twofold. One is the endless meetings about the same thing for 3 months out before the event, right? You'll do a conference call. Now it's a lot of Zoom meetings, but in the corporate world, everybody is so afraid. And this is just my opinion, I think why this happens. They have the same meeting 12 times before you get to the show, right? And I think that's because nobody wants to be on the line should something go wrong to say, why did we not have a meeting about this, right? So they want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And I completely understand it. And that's, of course, why I am always more than happy to do it. That said, the other hard part for corporate clients is to understand that a show with audience interaction, while it can be planned, you have to understand it's an evolving animal. So if you want a great show, I may have to step out of my set list a couple of times. Or so they like to, a corporate client likes to get a sheet of paper with everything listed on it so they know what to expect. So for me, I tend to view it, I'll give them that and I let them know, hey, and if it alters, don't worry. The main thing is I won't go overtime than you want. Because if I go 5 minutes over, I have now thrown the rest of the day out of whack. Everybody is mad at me. So what I do is I just try to hit it. I hit the time perfectly, unless they say, no, it doesn't matter, Mike. And then I might do, an extra 5 or 10 minutes. But the hard part is just the constant meetings about the same thing. And I want to make them feel better. And I think until they see you and get a relationship with you, it's impossible to do that. So you just do your best. So that's the highs and the lows.
Yeah. You mentioned before he came on about his willingness to stay after the show and do things, but the time that he spent and the few times we booked him, you weren't privy to this because you don't have to be in these meetings, but meetings about the meeting can be endless and there's a lot of them. And he was so patient. And I know you were raised on the improv maxim of yes and.
Yes.
What he would do when there would be a stupid request is he wouldn't say no. He would say, yeah. And how about if we add to it? Or, yeah, here's another way you could go. So he never shot them down. He would just steer them in the right direction so that it would work.
He's a smart guy. He's a tremendous performer. And he's traveling all over the country doing shows. So if you are anywhere and you see that Mike Super is going to be in your nape of the neck, by all means, beat a path to his show
Yeah.
because he is terrific. He won the television show Phenomenon,
Yep.
which was before, I think, certainly before Penn and Teller's show.
Hmm.
And I think maybe, really before it exploded. I think America's Got Talent was going on at that point, but before that was sort of the television show that morphed into the television show that morphed into the television show that we all now, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But he won Phenomenon.
Yep.
And there was some stiff competition. It was an all magician
Yep.
talent show, and to come out of that uh, on top says a lot about Mike Super in all the right ways.
Well, yeah, he's a terrific magician, but he's also a terrific entertainer, which really
Well,
helps.
yeah,
I loved what he said about corporate audiences have low expectations. And it's true because they've been listening to essentially non-professional speakers, perhaps much of their day or much of the 2 or 3 days that they're doing this sort of thing. And so when you get someone who knows how to perform, in looking back on all the performances I saw in 30 years of doing corporate meetings, when someone like George Campbell steps on
right.
stage as Joe Malarkey, he can change the energy in the room. And there's no question that he's hysterically funny, but he also is not needing to top anything that came before him because the very fact that he's on stage already tops what came before. And Mike Super is like that as well.
He's tremendous, and I am tickled pink that after all these years, because that's got to be, John, what, 20 years ago?
Maybe, yeah. It's a while ago.
that we worked with him.
Yep.
He still pops up in an email to me occasionally, or a Facebook comment, or something like that, and that anytime it happens, I get a big smile on my face because he's Mike Super and he's commenting on something I put on Facebook, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
He's a great guy, and as I say, if you see his name anywhere close to where you live, go. Bring everyone you know, because he's just a tremendous evening of magic and
Yeah.
entertainment.
And you don't have to be in the corporate world to find him. He does the occasional arts center tour, so you can
Yeah,
find
he's
him.
doing a lot of that,
Yeah.
a lot more of that, and you know what else he's doing? He's doing a lot of work with the military. So
Oh,
he's doing a lot of kind of, he's just a
USO kinds of shows.
great guy, great. Can't say enough good about him. Run, don't walk.
Yeah.
If you
And
Mike Su
I have a link in the show notes to his full interview as well as to his website. And if you're looking at the links in the show notes, I also have links to the Behind the Page Eli Marks podcast YouTube site. If you want to go there and subscribe, that'd be a huge help to us. And I believe at this point, almost all, almost all of the 8-part series that I put up of past interviews will be available for you to listen to. And those are easy to find, and they're all categorized in different ways. So lots of stuff to listen to there, lots of stuff to love. And speaking of things that you can love,
you
it's
go
time for I
first.
Love That. I get to go first. And this is something
No.
I loved from the beginning. I had to look back because it's me. Of course, I have an Excel document of the things we've talked about because we're both getting up there. Me more so than you, but
Oh,
you're almost you're edging up.
I'm catching up.
You're catching up. Anyway, it's a show that came about a couple years ago, and they just finished putting up the second season. I was interested in it because it was created and in many parts written by, in some cases directed by, Ryan Johnson, who wrote and directed one of the best mysteries movies in the last 20 years, which was Knives Out.
Oh,
Uh, but it's the same
there.
Ryan Johnson who wrote and directed Glass Onion, which is one of the worst mystery movies of the last 20 years. So, you know,
It
everybody,
happens.
it happens. It
They
happens.
can't all be gems.
It can't all be gems. And I'm sure there's people out there screaming, no, Glass Onion was better than Knives Out. But he had a long time to work on Knives Out, and he didn't have a long time to work on Glass Onion. But anyway, he went on to create a series sort of in the mold of Columbo, and we're big Columbo fans here, called Poker
Absolutely.
Face. And Poker Face, I believe it's on NBC Peacock. The premise is there's a woman named Charlie, played by Natasha Lyonne, who is normal in all regards except that she can tell when you're lying.
What's it like? Always knowing the truth.
There's nothing mystical about it. I could just tell.
When anyone is lying.
Yeah. I know what you did, you psycho.
You're gonna find Charlie killed, and you're gonna bring her to me.
And like Columbo, it's set up where generally the first act is the murder. You see the murder, you often see who the murderer is and how they did it. And then from that point on, the rest of the program, and they run an hour long, 49 minutes, whatever. The rest of it is sometimes going back and rewatching the first act, but from Charlie's point of view, from Natasha Lyonne's point of view, because you find out she was actually there and was part of everything. Other times she just shows up after the murder, but the rest of the episode is her figuring out who's lying and who isn't, and solving the crime in her own
Inimitable.
inimitable and sardonic way. She is a unique performer who brings a lifetime of interesting stuff to her role. She's very funny in it. The mysteries are generally pretty good. The way they're solved are generally pretty good. Great guest stars show up. Adrian Brody, who we mentioned last time from See How They Run, is in the first episode. John Mulaney shows up this season. Rhea Perlman, Richard Kind. It's a great, fun series that is so tied to the idea of Columbo that they even use the same font and typeface for the titles of their show to make it seem more like Columbo. So that's I love that this time. It's called Poker Face and it's from the man who brought us Knives Out.
Is it, John, is it still, on?
It is it's on, it'll be probably on forever because it's one of those shows that'll probably move around, and I'm guessing they're gonna do a 3rd season at some point. Natasha Lyonne is also now writing some of them, and she's been directing some of them. She directed one last season with Nick Nolte, which was lovely. It's definitely worth a look.
All right. I will absolutely give it a look.
Alright, and what is your I love that?
Well, it's a longer, I love that for me. The thing, that my entire family would say was the love of my life, including my wife, who is happy to admit, no, that was the love of his life, was, our golden retriever,
Yep,
Woody,
yep.
who, died just a little past his 10th birthday. But he was an extraordinary golden retriever, and the first dog that we've had in the 5 dogs we had before him, who decided I was the guy. The other dogs have picked other members of my family. No dog has ever picked me, except Woody, and,
Mhm.
he was the love of my life. I absolutely could not get enough time with Woody, and 10 years, 10 and a half years was absolutely not enough time,
Mhm.
with Woody. And it was devastating, heartbreaking for me when
Yeah.
I barely can talk about it now without tearing up, as you can see, who can
Mm.
see me, but the
Yeah,
audience cannot, but you can.
yeah.
He was extraordinary, an extraordinary dog. Um, and we still have 2 dogs that I love, and they love me, but not like Woody did. They love my wife more than me, which
Mhm.
is fine. I love my wife more than me. I get it. But the opportunity presented itself to get another golden retriever puppy. And so we are gonna do that. It's from the same breeder, and it'll be a half brother to Woody because it's the same father, different mother.
Mm.
That's the setup for my I love that.
Alright.
Uh, I started to think about, okay, if I'm gonna do this, I don't want, because typically a golden retriever lives 10 or 11 years, and that's not enough for me, and so I started to do some research about what could I do? How could I do it? Is there anything I can do, to change that 10-year, 11-year window? Is there a way to extend that in some way? And I didn't find this, it found me, which often happens now in this crazy world where, you know, they're listening to us
Yes.
constantly. I'm not saying that as a sort of a conspiracy theorist. They are.
Yeah.
Prime rib, just say that. And now my Facebook feed is going to be filled with, hey, if you're going to cook prime rib, here's a good deal. So
And everyone else's Facebook feeds now who's listening.
yeah, sorry about that. If your phone is listening and you heard me say prime rib, enjoy, because I do. But I found this book, or the book found me on Kindle, called The Forever Dog. And it is written by 2 veterinarians, and they are essentially saying, hey, there is a way, you're not gonna double your dog's lifespan, just the way if you take care of yourself, you're not gonna double your own lifespan and get to 160, but what you wanna do is extend that period of time where you're healthy as long as you can, so you go healthy, 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 sick, die, and there's not a lot of sick, 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 die. It
Mhm.
just it's short, and
Yeah.
you're healthy for a long time. And so I'm reading this book called, The Forever Dog, and if you are a dog owner, it's fascinating to find out how many things about you and your personality and the way you deal with stress spills over into your animals, and what we're feeding them might not be the best thing to feed them. We've always fed kibble, and high-end kibble. I get my kibble from Canada, but even that, they say it's like us going to McDonald's for every meal. It's probably not the best in terms of extending your life. So I'm fascinated by this book, the forever dog as we start to get geared up here to welcome another golden retriever puppy to the family. And my 7-year-old Jack Russell Terrier and my 3-year-old half golden retriever, half Australian Shepherd, we're going to try some of the things in this book and just see where it goes. We're going to start making our own dog food. We're going to start how we deal with stress. And I'm interested to see how it affects me. But more than that, I'm hopeful that when we bring this golden retriever home, that instead of 10 or 11 years, maybe I get 14 or 15 years. And I'm looking at this, John, as perhaps the last puppy.
You never know.
You never know. Of
Never
course,
say last puppy.
but
Well, that's fascinating. I was really worried when you started, you were going to go down the Barbara Streisand path and have him cloned.
no.
So you get the
Did she
exact
have
same
something
dog.
cloned?
She has her dog. Yeah, her dog was cloned, I believe. I don't know how far down the path she's gone, but I think she has at least one dog that was cloned.
No, that's
No.
good.
So, and I'm hoping, as I'm sure you are, that the puppy you get is not Woody's evil twin.
Yeah, it's possible, right?
It's
But
possible.
this breeder is so good, and she breeds beautiful, and the possibility exists that we are going to co-own this dog with the breeder, and she's confident that this particular litter is going to produce some show dogs, and we might co-own with her, and then she would show the dog and finish it, and we'd have, I don't know what.
So we
Maybe
might at some point see you running with the dog in the center of the ring at
it's
the
not gonna be me.
Westminster.
I'll be in the stands, cheering him or her on, because it could go either way.
Yeah.
We have not had great success with female dogs. But the two female dogs we've had, both were problematic.
Yeah.
I loved them and they loved us, but they didn't love a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And our male dogs are like, "Hey, nice to see you. Are you here to rob the place? Let me show you where the good stuff is." And so I'm kind of leaning towards a male, but she said, if you're open to a female, we'll see which one I think is going to be the best show dog.
Well, yes, and it'll be interesting to see how she takes over for the other two dogs in the house, because
Yeah, exactly.
that
Yeah.
often happens. Well, that's fascinating. That's lovely.
Forever dog. I love that. You can put a link in the show notes.
I will do that, as well as a link for Poker Face. So,
I want to start reading. So we're doing the linking rings. Chapter 14 this episode. Just circle the wagons for us and tell us what happened in chapter 13.
I'll just make this brief. They did a test of the Catherine wheel illusion, which made Jake sick. Then they find out there's been another death, that Hector has been found dead from 1,000,000 cuts. And Harry and McHugh suspect that the long dead Archie Banks is the killer. And that takes us right into chapter 14.
Chapter 14. As tantalizing as this bizarre statement was, both Harry and McHugh declined to elaborate further until, as McHugh explained obliquely, we do a quick check of the paperwork. Instead, Harry insisted that since we were already seated in a fine Indian restaurant, it would be borderline criminal not to partake in some fine Indian food. This argument was met with annoyed grumbles, but once the food began to arrive, the primary sounds from the table were simple, satisfied sighs of contentment. Once we were all sated, McHugh sat back, wiped his face with the cloth napkin, and suggested we all accompany him to his flat for some coffee, tea, and much-needed explanations. "All will be elucidated," he promised. Megan, DeVries, and I were all for it, but Roy Templeton opted out of the plan almost immediately. "Thanks for the invite. I'm as intrigued as the rest of you," he said to the group as we assembled in front of the restaurant. "But I left Roxanne alone out there at Baxter's Farm." He caught himself before completing his traditional dig at Lawrence Baxter's estate, and in deference to his host's current situation, took a decidedly kinder tone in his remarks. "She's alone out there at Larry's, and I think she'd like some company.
When I called and told her the news about Hector, it hit her hard. To be honest, it's still settling in on me. Let me know what comes of this whole Archie Banks thing. And be sure to give me a call if you find Elvis as well.
With that final attempt at humor, he flagged a passing cab and was gone. I put out a hand to signal another taxi for our group, but McHugh waved it away.
We're 2 minutes from Euston Station, and it's a 6-minute tube ride to my flat. Trust me, in today's traffic, we'll be better off on the train.
With that, he led us to the nearby station, and less than 10 minutes later, we were exiting a different station, one which deposited us into a charming London neighborhood known as Camden Town. Upon seeing the sign announcing the station, I realized my only other experience with Camden Town had been that it was my sole spoken line in a high school production of A Christmas Carol. Due to the large number of characters in the show, a wide net had been cast for supporting players, a net which eventually captured me and a handful of other non-theater geeks. My one line came near the climax of the performance when, as the poulterer, I was dragged on stage to confront a recently transformed Ebenezer Scrooge, who instructed me to
take this bird to Bob Cratchit, 15 Bagshot Row, Camden Town.
At that point, I would utter my one line, "Camden Town?" which would then propel Scrooge into a longer spiel about how the bird was too large and how I needed a cab and so forth. Even at the time, it seemed like a lot of effort for very little payoff. I had to arrive at the theater an hour before the show, sit around in an itchy wool costume for 2 hours, and then wander on stage to say 2 words, which in reality weren't truly required to move the plot forward. To prove my point, one night I decided to skip my line altogether, which produced only a momentary pause on Scrooge's part as I stared back at him blankly. Unflustered, he launched back into his monologue, and the show continued as if nothing had gone astray. If I had to pinpoint the one moment that determined why I became a magician instead of an actor, that would be it. Ironically, the role of Ebenezer Scrooge in the production was performed by none other than Jake North, who was routinely handed all the key male roles throughout his sunny high school theatrical career. This, in turn, made him very popular with the girls. However, I took solace in the fact that while Jake was getting all the girls, I had, by the age of 16, nearly perfected the Erdnase diagonal palm shift. Turns out self-delusion is a strong force at any age. Remembering A Christmas Carol got me thinking of its famous opening line, "Marley was dead," to begin with. "There is no doubt whatsoever about that," which returned me to the purpose for this sudden expedition to McHugh's flat. The amazing suggestion that the 3 murdered magicians had been struck down by a man thought to be dead for over 30 years. Dead as a doornail, as the saying goes. Or not.
I will readily confess to, during the course of my career, squirreling away copies of the occasional official ephemera that passed across my desk and piqued my interest,
McHugh said, as he pulled open one of several file drawers in a cramped alcove off his small sitting room.
I have, over the years, winnowed the file considerably, but I believe the document in question is one that I held on to, for reasons I hope will soon become apparent. As it is, at the very least, an interesting read.
The 4 of us, Harry, DeVries, Megan, and I, were in his sitting room, sipping tea and nibbling on the sugar cookies McHugh had placed out before us before he began his deep dive into his filing system. Although system might have been too strong a word. Small filing cabinets were loaded on top of other, larger, mismatched filing cabinets, with stacks of paper resting precariously on top of these equally haphazard cabinet towers. While I couldn't distinguish any sort of organizational structure, it only took him about 5 minutes and what appeared to be 2 incorrect drawer dives
for him to put his hands on the piece of paper that he was searching for. "I have seen my share of suicide notes over the years," he said, as he turned toward the group. He held the paper up to the light to check it was, in fact, the one he was hunting for, and then turned back and closed the drawer from which he had extracted it. "But this is one of the few I made a copy of, because it was, and I suspect still is, endlessly intriguing. And I think," he continued, as he lowered himself into the remaining empty chair, "it may offer some insight into the events of the last 5 or 6 days. He gave the paper one last look and then handed it over to Harry. Harry glanced at the faded piece of paper while he patted his pockets, trying to determine the location of his glasses. From where I was sitting, I could see the note was handwritten and appeared to be a photocopy of the original. Harry finally gave up on his search and looked over at me. "Eli, I can't find my glasses. Do you mind?" He handed the paper to me and sat back in his chair, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. I looked down at the document. The photocopy was a bit smeared, however, the handwriting was so neat and precise that it was still easy to read despite the poor quality of the copy. I read the single sheet out loud. "To whom it may concern, this is the only way out I can see. No other options remain. You know who you are and what you have done to me. You stabbed me in the back and poisoned my reputation. I'm already dying a death of 1,000 cuts, so I might as well go ahead and complete the job you started. You have drowned my dreams, pushed me over the edge, and I am at a point of no return. I hope you can live with that. While my career goes up in flames, you ride high on success, fueled by the failure you heaped upon me. This may be my death, but my blood is on your hands. A.B." I finished reading and turned the paper over to ensure I hadn't left anything out. Confident I had completed my assignment, I handed the paper to Davis DeVries, who took it gingerly, as if it possessed heretofore unknown explosive properties. "Oh, my," he said, holding the document at arm's length. "He really did blame us for the nosedive his career took, didn't he?" "It was his own fault," Harry said firmly. "It was a bizarre fiction back then, and it is equally bizarre under today's circumstances. There is honor among magicians. If you steal from your brethren, I think you shouldn't be surprised when they give you the boot. He blamed us for everything bad that happened to him, when in fact he had no one to blame but himself." I really can't," DeVries said, stammering as he looked up at McHugh and Harry. "I really can't fathom what you are thinking. Are you actually suggesting Archie Banks has come back from beyond the grave and is killing us one by one? Are you suggesting that?" Harry greeted this short outburst with a warm smile. "Oh, no, Doctor. I don't believe we're suggesting anything of a supernatural or otherworldly explanation for the events of the last few days." "Absolutely," McHugh said, and I realized for the first time he was still wearing his Trilby hat, which laid to rest any question I had about him ever taking it off. I had assumed it would come off at home, which was not the case. "However," he continued, "the specific wording of the suicide note, coupled with the circumstances of the 3 recent deaths, are too analogous to be ignored." DeVries had passed the note back to me, and I read part of the note aloud. "You stabbed me in the back and poisoned my reputation." I looked up at the small group. Well, that certainly describes what happened to Oscar and Boris. "Coincidence," DeVries huffed, clearly not getting on board with this train of thought. "Absolutely," Harry agreed. "That certainly could fall under the heading of a common coincidence. However, it's the other phrase. I'm already dying a death of 1,000 cuts, which I think moves this out of the realm of coincidence and into—" he looked around the room. "Well, I'm not entirely sure where it moves us." "Archie Banks is dead," DeVries said, clearly getting annoyed at where the conversation was headed. "Yes, that is the most likely premise," McHugh said, standing up and moving across the small sitting room. The entire flat, with the exception of his office alcove, was neat and tidy and had the feel of a woman's touch in the small details. I suspected the apartment had seen very few changes since the death of Cora, McHugh's wife. Harry's apartment offered the same museum-like setting to the memory of his own late wife, my Aunt Alice. "And if you follow that line of thinking," he continued, moving to the window and pulling back a curtain to let more light into the room, "then someone is using the suicide note as a blueprint of sorts to exact a revenge on Archie Banks' magical peers. And so far, doing a bang-up job," Harry said. "Indeed," McHugh said, returning to his chair. "The next line in the note," I said, glancing down to confirm my memory, "is, 'You have drowned my dreams.' Since, so far, the killer's been going in order, I'm guessing that would be the next likely line of attack." "Of course," I added, thinking back to the large estate which was currently housing the Magi, "there aren't a lot of opportunities for drowning at Baxter's mansion. He's got a great fitness room, but no pool. I didn't see any lake out in the heath, unlike Minnesota where you can't turn around without stepping into a body of water of some size. Other than a bird bath in the garden, I'm not sure where he or she would find the opportunity." "Well, the killer got Hector into a hotel room, so I don't think we should confine the area of concern to Hampstead Heath," McHugh said. "There are plenty of bodies of water, including the Thames, which has seen its share of drowning victims to choose from, I'm afraid." "You're afraid," Harry said with a bit of a growl. "The only thing you need to be afraid of is the possibility of being collateral damage." McHugh stood behind his chair and placed his hands on top of it, straightening a small white doily which lay across it. "Admittedly," he agreed. "However, our first step must be to take this information to the fellows on the force so they can follow up on our line of thinking. That a person or persons unknown are bringing Archie Banks' words from his suicide note to life, as it were, as well as explore the other, less likely path." DeVries narrowed his eyes at McHugh and then looked to Harry. "And what is that other, less likely path?" "The other line of thinking, as absurd as it might be to consider, is to question a fact we always thought was beyond reproach," Harry said. "And that fact is?" DeVries pressed as he folded his arms across his chest. "That Archie Banks may not actually be dead," Harry said. He turned to McHugh, who nodded in silent agreement. "This is nonsense," DeVries said when we stepped back out onto the street an hour later. I sensed from his mood he was an unlikely subway candidate at the moment, so I began to scan the street for an available taxi. "I would not say nonsense," Harry said. "Bizarre, yes. Implausible, by all means. But this is a deadly business, and it cannot be treated lightly." DeVries harumphed and took up his own search for a cab, looking down the street in the opposite direction from where I was looking. I wasn't entirely in his camp about Archie Banks at this point, but I was also far from convinced by the events of the last hour. McHugh had spent a good deal of that time on the phone with Detective Inspector Matthews, suggesting in which file she could find the original copy of Archie Banks' suicide note and offering several possible directions in which the investigation could head. Most seemed reasonable to me, but one felt absolutely gothic. And they are actually considering exhuming Banks's body, DeVries said, turning back from his cab search. Literally, digging up the past? That would put one of the theories to rest, Harry said quietly. Nonsense, DeVries repeated, and returned to his taxi search. Let's get back to the Heath and see how Baxter's holding up. One of the pieces of information McHugh had gleaned in his phone call was that the police had finished their initial interview with Lawrence Baxter, and he had been released without any charges being filed. What's so odd about this, I said, ignoring DeVries' peak, is how all the murders implicate Baxter, but at the same time, they don't. What do you mean? Harry said. I could see DeVries had turned slightly so he could listen while still pretending to be deeply engrossed in the hunt for transportation. Well, he is the president of the board at the Magic Circle, but he was not particularly involved in the setup or rehearsal for the event which took Oscar Carhonen's life. And he was the host for the house party where Boris was poisoned, but it was determined Boris's tea bags were likely tampered with long before he arrived at Baxter's Folly. I stopped myself, a little ashamed of having adopted Roy Templeton's term for Baxter's estate. And finally, a third house guest of his was found murdered using techniques that require medical expertise. However, it didn't happen in his house, but instead at a hotel, miles away. Harry considered what I had said. And what does all that mean? I shook my head. I actually don't know. It might mean nothing at all. DeVries had succeeded in hailing a cab and was ushering us toward its open rear door. Well, here's one thing I do know that is absolutely true, Harry said before we climbed into the taxi. I really wish I had packed more than this one pair of shoes. I looked down at his feet, sporting a fine pair of black Italian leather shoes, which were as polished and pristine as the day he had bought them. Why is that? Harry turned and looked up at McHugh's flat. Because if I know my friend, I would imagine in the next day or so, I will be wearing these very shoes while we traipse and trample through a muddy cemetery in search of a ghost. He was partially correct in his prediction, but as it turned out, it was my far less expensive pair of Jack Purcell sneakers that were about to do all the traipsing.
Ah, yes, the shoes. The shoes. When traveling, you should always bring a couple different pairs of shoes.
I never do.
Yeah, I always try to have a spare one just in case something happens. It isn't really revealed at the end of chapter 14 exactly why he's worried about shoes, but I will spoil it by saying they're going to Highgate Cemetery. We'll talk more about that next time. But yes, this particular chapter takes place in Camden Town,
Camden Town?
which was my one line in the 10-year production of A Christmas Carol.
I'm reminded of a Stephen Wright joke.
Please tell me.
Some of these are individual jokes, folks. When you've heard yours, feel free to leave.
Yeah.
And certainly Camden Town was an inside joke between the two of us that I got a big kick out of.
Well, I will tell this story briefly because it is one of my favorite acting stories. My only line was Camden Town. I would put on an apron, grab a basket, run up to the stage with whoever is playing the young kid at that point, and Scrooge would look down and he'd say his lines, which I don't quite remember, and then say that I had to go to Camden Town, and I would say with surprise, Camden Town, which is quite a ways away.
Incredulity, I
Yeah,
think.
that was yes. And I believe our good friend John Schumacher was playing Scrooge at this point, and he's an excellent actor, one of the best of the three Scrooges we had, you being one of the other best ones, and Jay Nickerson being the other best of the three Scrooges.
It's the second
Anyway.
episode Nickerson's name has showed
Oh,
up.
that's weird, yeah. Anyway, I thought I will be an actor at this point, and I will just be in the moment. I'll listen to what he says, and I'll react in a realistic way. And he said all of his stuff, but he changed the wording, and he didn't say Camden Town. He said like Camdenville or something. He didn't say the right thing. And because I was right there in the moment, in my brain, I went, what does he mean? I've heard of Camden Town, but what is he talking about? Because I, as the character, did not understand because he had said the wrong thing. And John Schumacher looked at me for a long moment and then immediately went into the next line. Oh, that's too far to go for you to walk. Here's the money you need for a cab. And we were beyond it. And I don't know if he did that on purpose, just to throw me off, but that was it for me
You
being a method
were
actor.
you were the poulterer,
And he was saying the name of a city I'd never heard of.
and you were the poulterer. How
Yeah.
could you it just I played, in Butterflies Are Free, the blind kid,
Yeah.
the young actor, and Jay Nickerson, who shows up for the 3rd time now,
He's
uh
becoming the Eugene Berger of this.
that's right. He played the other male lead, which doesn't show up until late in the show, and, he showed up to make me laugh. He showed up and had covered his entire chest with crepe hair to try to make me laugh and had drawn a tattoo on his arm with my mother's name on it. And we finished the show, and we took our bows, and we came off stage, and he looked at me and said, I thought you would get a big kick and laugh. And I said, at what? And he said, look at me. And I looked at him and he said, didn't you? And I said, no, I didn't see it. I'm blind on stage. And I literally did not see it until we were off stage
Oh,
because I was playing a blind guy. You were the poulterer. How are you supposed to?
yeah, I know.
Anyway, there
And
it is.
it's tough being a method actor.
Yeah,
Absolutely
really.
tough. Anyway, that was it for chapter 14. We've got a blueprint for murder going on there that is sort of interesting that we'll find out more about next time. And next time, oh boy, finally, here it is. We're going to chat with the one and only magical Katrina. She popped up like a lot of magicians do on my social media feeds. And she is
A
uh,
genius.
yes, but she's also like Kathleen Turner in Body Heat. She is relentless when it comes to understanding how to promote yourself. She's an entrepreneur. She's a magician as
He
entrepreneur.
is a genius. I'm
Yeah,
telling you.
yeah,
Some of the things that she says in this interview, are worth the fact that you are with us in the 5th season of this podcast. She really opened my eyes to a couple of things, and, like you said, she's on my social channel, but she is so good at dropping little things that are entertaining and funny just to keep her in your mind, to keep her at the forefront. She's terrific, and it's a great interview, and I hope you'll be here for it because it's absolutely terrific.
yeah. That'll be next time. We'll listen to chapter 15, and then we will. Before that, we will chat with the one and only magical Katrina. Until then, take care, everybody.
Hey, let's be kind to each other. What do you say?
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.